Hi there, Eric here. I'm here at the Kyoto International Convention Center, also known as the Kyoto Kokusai Kaikan. Right behind me is the lunch area. I've been here several times. This is where TEDx Kyoto is hosted. Internet Governance Forum is mostly run by the United Nations. And here at this particular event, there's like 5,000 people here, about 300 sessions. But there are topics here ranging from the future of governing AI to I was originally asked to come here to be a panelist on the topic of child safety in the metaverse. There's also topics around data privacy, data collection, equity in using the internet, and a whole bunch of other topics. And this morning, I visited already 3 sessions, and as a digital literacy nerd, a digital citizenship nerd, digital engagement nerd, there's a lot of thoughts that I had rolling around in my head regarding these first sessions at this Global Internet Forum. There's members, dignitaries, diplomats, ministers, titles like Minister of Technology and Development or heads of NGOs that are doing work around digital inclusion, privacy, and all that fun stuff. So the first session I attended was a very high level one where we had ministers of from different countries that are at the top level of deciding policy and direction for country direction as far as overall technology development and governing. So there was the Minister of Technology and Development from Japan, and there was a minister from South Africa, India, and 2 other countries. And of course, this is a very high level talk. A lot of the panel members had a lot to say, but had a lot of words coming out of their mouths, but not necessarily a whole lot to say, a lot of general ideas and directions. And they were connecting the importance of digital governance, data privacy, and all these other things to other things that are important to the world and their countries, like global climate change and the growing inequities of the classes and things like that. One thing that came up as a reoccurring topic in that opening session is the idea of trust and also interoperability. Now, this goes to the larger kind of theme that came across already today, and that is there is a whole lot of incongruencies and kind of ideas that kind of clash against each other when we're talking about trying to govern and make a more equitable digital society moving towards the future. So they're talking about the idea, the need for interoperability, but also the very important need for trusting data, trusting where it comes from, being able to trust giving up your data. And these ideas are inherently in conflict, and it almost became kind of an elephant in the room in my mind as these topics started to progress, because they acknowledged the need to collect more data. They acknowledged the need to share data between countries in order to do good things in the world. But they also kept talking about this idea of being able to trust where data comes from, being able to trust and give up data, and trust that data is going to be used. And sharing data for good, sharing data that's obviously might be misused. Trust is also a big issue, but being able to be more interoperable, meaning the data is more available to more parties and more widely available to other systems, kind of goes against that idea. And that kind of that idea transitioned into the next session, which I attended, which the topic was the Internet Commons Forum, ICF. And their topic of discussion was digital sovereignty, which is also a very conflicted thing to think about as well. So Internet Commons is the idea, think Wikipedia, right? It's a digital good, digital process, digital service, digital data that is widely available, open source, free to use for everybody. And Wikipedia is kind of like the seminal example of that, right? It's an NGO, they're largely nonprofit, although they do make some, and they collect data, and that data is used for probably one of the more trusted, depending on who you ask, sources of collective data for the entire world. It's in more languages, translated in more things, and it's editable and accessible to more people on the internet than almost any other collective service. And we do that as a society. We create that together. Now, to take that a step further, the topic they were discussing today was digital sovereignty, which a lot of different things were talked about around the idea of commons in the concept of being able to control your own destiny when it comes to your identity, comes to your abilities and your competence when it regards to digital things. Like one example that came up is there was a digital policymaker from Brazil, and she talked about how the banks were basically extracting large amounts of money out of the country, like Visa and MasterCard, in fees and data leaving the country when they could essentially try to have their own will or their own policy making around the movement of digital currencies within their country. So they made this new service. I think they called it PIX, and it was a kind of a public-private partnership, which is also muddy waters when that concerned with one of the central banks in Brazil. And now anyone with a phone and a bank account and an internet connection can be a part of the system in Brazil, and then also not be necessarily needing these other more global entities like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, etc. Then a representative from India came up and started talking about this idea of these commons and how they relate to public and private entities, relationships. And another idea, again, this is kind of goes against each other. These common goods that we put out on the internet, open source, Creative Commons, other things like that, are preyed upon by commercial interests more often. Now we see this all the time with artificial intelligence, right? All these things that go up on the internet, all these things that we make available to everyone, commercial interests find a way to collect that data and monetize it in some fashion. For example, there are articles on Wikipedia being copied into other websites or being used to train AI models, etc. And so she talked about how the open commons community on the internet is being basically used as a natural resource for commercial interest in this space, and how to kind of get around that and have more digital goods that are freely available, but not necessarily helping to give free resources to these larger companies, which will in turn somehow put them into their walled gardens and make their already grip on the global digital landscape even tighter. Now, this was an interesting foray into the next speaker, who was from Wikipedia. And she reiterated on that in the fact that Wikipedia itself is the largest body of information that is crawled by artificial intelligence, namely large language models, to use to train them to answer questions, to be able to respond to basic knowledge and information. Does Wikipedia, which is a common good created by everybody on the planet together, the largest resource pretty much on the internet, do they get some sort of recompense or some sort of fee or anything like that? No, because it's a public good, it's out there, it's open source. And so now we have large language models built on Wikipedia that is now being commercialized for different reasons. Now we could also talk about how this same panel was also talking about how to open source and make new models around AI that people can empower and have their own communities of practice. A lot of these country representatives, there was a lady from Germany as well that talked about needing to have their own AI sovereignty in their country, not giving up data to train models perhaps in other countries, that ones that are kind of specific and open source and pointed at the good and well-being of specific people and communities in Germany. All very important. But all of these ideas kind of go back and forth. There's no clear rendition. There's no clear answer to a lot of these issues that came up. All right, the third session also kind of built upon this. It was a group of technologists from Japan, and they were talking about the idea of a data trust bank. And so a lot of the ideas that comes back to the beginning, having an understanding more deep relationships with trust and who can we give our data to and how do we understand how the data gets used and how do we have maybe call back our data or have it interoperable with other data systems is a big issue with a lot of countries, a lot of governments, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea to have an intermediary in between of all that, between you and your relationship with your data and brokerage that data out to companies or organizations or the government to let you have more control over it is not necessarily a new idea. There's other countries looking at things like trust banks and other types of systems, but this particular organization here in Japan headed up, it's like an association, one of the largest ones in IT in Japan, are trying to introduce this idea as a way forward for basically safety, data privacy, safety against data collection for society in general moving forward. But there's also an inherent kind of risk or a contradiction in the way that this operates as well, because then now you are trusting an intermediary to handle and certify people that are going to take and use your data for different means. But also, as soon as your data goes through this interoperary, goes to company A, B, or XYZ, then it's out in the wild again. And then I use that term brokerage also because there are data brokers already doing these similar things already, but they're only operating in the self-interest of collecting personal data, putting it together, and putting it in packages for which to sell to other company to exploit for whatever commercial reason. So that can still happen, I believe, as they explained it in this process of having an intermediary. There might be more transparency in being able to track down transgressions of using your data through this pattern. How it gets clawed back and used for that is still largely unknown. All right, I had a lot more thoughts on this. I wanted to dump my brain out before I went back in for the next round of sessions. I'm really looking forward to a governance of metaverse and standardizations of metaverse technologies, accessibility for metaverse technologies. And later on this afternoon, maybe I'll come back and re-up my thoughts of what's happening around this here in Kyoto, Japan, at the Internet Governance Forum here at the Kokusai Kaikan in Kyoto. All right, guys. See ya. Bye-bye.